of the West, deep in the Soviet bloc. Without any one of the three allies, America, Britain, or the USSR, the defeat of Nazi Germany would have been impossible. Of the three allies, the Soviet Union and its people made a tremendous sacrifice, paying the highest price in death and destruction. Theirs was the only territory that was to become a battlefield. It was Soviet soldiers that did most of the dying for the Allies. From a position of near defeat in 1941, as Barbarossa brought German forces to within the sight of the Kremlin, victory had fallen into the lap of Stalin and the Soviet system. What had begun as a desperate war of national survival ended with a triumphal reversal of fortune as the Red Army swept westward. The Soviet Union of the 1930s had abandoned any idealism of spreading world revolution. Stalin chose instead to build absolute power in Russia rather than indulge in political conversions. With Hitler's defeat, though, vast prizes of territory and population fell into Stalin's hands, and policy towards this new empire had to be improvised. It is a fact of history that Stalin was personally responsible for more deaths than was Hitler, and that Stalinism was a more encompassing and comprehensive system of terror than Nazism. Winston Churchill contributed a legendary phrase to the language of the world when speaking at Fulton, Missouri. He said,
"From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent."
Behind that iron curtain, 2 generations were to live as subjects of the Soviet Empire. Eastern Europe was to be an unhappy place from which its citizens sought only to flee. As Europe resumed normal life and contemplated the peace, the war in the Pacific reached its conclusion, and Japan was to reap the final fruit of its militarism and aggression. In August 1945, a single action, a single aircraft, changed history. A single B-29 bomber dropped a single weapon which devastated the city of Hiroshima, revealing to the world the greatest Allied secret of the war, codenamed the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. The nuclear weapon was built to be used against Nazi Germany, against the fear that German scientists, the discoverers of nuclear fission, were also building a bomb. As we look at the haunted and ghostly ruins of a city eliminated in an instant, we must contemplate that even in the spring of 1945, with Americans and British across the Rhine and Russian guns in earshot of Berlin, a German nuclear bomb dropped on a masked Russian army group. A nuclear-tipped V-2 missile fired at London. A nuclear V-2 launched from a U-boat at New York. For the Germans had designed that technology, would even at that last desperate late stage have reversed the fortune of war and brought Nazi victory. Germany had in fact neither the industrial resources nor the quantity of scientific expertise to build the bomb. Many of the scientists who built the bomb for America were themselves European exiles from Nazism. The Manhattan Project has a complete history of its own. An enormous enterprise that involved the construction of vast industrial plant and the labor of more than 600,000 industrial workers. By the time the first bomb had been tested in the desert of New Mexico and bombs were ready for use, Germany had already been defeated. History must ask why the bomb fell upon Japan. The lessons of fighting at Iwo Jima and Okinawa showed that Japanese forces would fight to the death in defending the home islands of Japan. It is true that many thousands of American lives were to be saved by the use of the bomb. The saving of American life may in fact have been a byproduct of United States policy. It was clear that the Soviet Union was to become an enemy and that the atomic bomb would be a MasterCard in any dealings with Russia in the post-war world. The true horror and power of this weapon could not be described in words or in tests. Its awesome power, and what is more, the will to wield that strength, to unleash that horror, had to be demonstrated in war. As 78,000 lay dead or dying in the ruins of Hiroshima, a White House statement demanded that Japan surrender now, or expect a rain of ruin from the air. The Japanese gave no reply, and 3 days later, a second bomb fell upon Nagasaki. 25,000 died. The Soviet Union cynically declared war on Japan on August 8th. Their long-promised offensive was now no longer needed. Stalin used the opportunity of a certain and imminent victory to seize territory, islands in the north of Japan, and to occupy the north of Korea. In the end, Emperor Hirohito broke the deadlock and broadcast to the Japanese people 5 days after the attack upon Nagasaki. His broadcast never mentioned the word surrender. He asked his people to be prepared for the coming of peace. On September 2nd, in Tokyo Bay, General Douglas MacArthur took the surrender of Japanese forces.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
World War II was over. The celebration of VJ Day on August 15th, 1945, once more filled the streets of America and Britain with celebrating crowds. Finally, the families of the two countries could look forward to the future with certainty. Already in both Britain and America, the process of demobilization for the armed forces and the realignment of society had begun. In the second half of 1945, in Britain alone, 170,000 men and women each month returned to civilian life, and war industry in both economies rapidly shed jobs. For many of these war workers, this meant that a delayed retirement could be enjoyed. For the many millions of women, the peace meant a return to a traditional